Ah, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Brachas Pedic Test Halacha Gimel, Dalid, and God willing, starting Hey. We are on Daf Tzadik Beis, and we're going to start Mamish on top of the Amid. Shchita Emesai Humavarech Aleha. We are continuing to learn the sugya of Birchas HaMitzvahs, as we had yesterday the machlokes between Rabbi Yechanan and Afuna, as we have in the Babli only Shitas Rabbi Yechanan, that Birchas HaMitzvahs is made over la'asiyasa. We have the Shita of Rav Huna that Birchas HaMitzvahs is made b'shas asiyasa. We then also learned exceptions, and we're going to continue now with the exception of Shchita, as we will see one Shita, that Shchita should be made after you do the Shchita, not prior to the Shchita. The Gemara is going to go back on Tzadik Beis on top to the Mishnah, to Halacha Gimel, where the Mishnah tells us that making a prayer, doing a tefillah, saying a tefillah for the past is a tefillah shav, and the Mishnah gave two examples regarding gender, regarding entering a city and hearing a tumult in one's home without knowing whose home. And the Gemara is going to make comments both on the gender tefillah with a huge chiddush here in the Yerushalmi, as well as the entering of the city and the differentiation between tefillah and a expression, a verbalization of bitachon, which is extremely important in contrast to the fact that we don't daven for the past, as we'll see in the Gemara. We're going to start Halacha Daled. Halacha Daled is going to focus on what we would call Tfilas Haderech. It evolved to the Tfilas Haderech that we have right now. What we're going to see, the Mishnah, we're going to see the Gemara, v'chulei. From there, the Gemara is going to also teach us about brachos that used to be recited prior to entering a Beis HaKisei, a latrine. And we're going to start, God willing, Mishnah Hey, beginning with the rule that chayiv levarach al hara'a kishem shehu mevarach al hatoiva. Even though, as the Gemara will learn pshat in the Mishnah, that there's a dayin ha'emes and there's a shachiyan. It's two different brachas, but the same simcha one experiences when making the shachiyanu or when making the hatoiva hametiv, that ideally should be the same simcha and enthusiasm that one should experience when they're making the bracha of dayan ha'emes. We're going to go in the Mishnah to various obligations that are required for us, on us, in the obligation of reverence towards Hashem, which is externalized towards how we behave when we're physically facing the Beis HaMikdash. The Mishnah is going to speak about how brachas were made and how they will be made in the Beis HaMikdash, not the way we make a bracha right now. Right now, in Shemona Esrei, right, we conclude the brachos. Baruch Ato Hashem Choinen Hadoas. In the Beis Hamikdash, it was Baruch Hashem Elokei Yisrael Min Ha'olam. Subsequently, Choinen Hadoas. And also that here, when we hear a bracha, we respond with Amen. In the Beis Hamikdash, the response to a bracha was by saying Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Elo'olam Vod. I don't know if we're going to finish the Mishnah today, but we will certainly, God willing, begin Halacha Hey, the fifth Mishnah. Without any further ado, right? That Tzadik Beis on top of the Amid, like we mentioned, Shchita Emesai Humavarech Aleha. So Rabbi Yechanan Amar, as he holds regarding all the Birchas HaMitzvahs, Oiver Lishchay, prior to the performance of the Shchita. As we learned, Al HaShchita, we spoke out yesterday that when you're shachting a carbon, you do Lishchay, but prior to the Shchita. However, Rabbi Yosi Ben Nehoiroi Oimar, no, that Shchita will be another exception. When is the bracha made? Only Mishayishchait, only after the Shchita was performed. The Gemara wants to know why, Lama, why should this be different? Answers explains the Gemara, Shema Tisnabel Shchitas, because there is a possibility that the animal will be rendered nevela through Shchita. Why will the animal be rendered nevela? As we have in the Tap Charedim, Be'echad mechamisha dvarim hamafsidim es hashchita. Guys, who remembers what are the chamisha dvarim? Shehiyah, derisa, chalada, hagrama, and ikur. If a person doesn't remember these five immediately, they're not qualified to be a sheikh. Now, that's something that might happen. So the person might sheikh incorrectly. When you do that, there was no shechita. The animal is dead. The animal was called an avela. So then it turns out that the bracha was a bracha levatala. So therefore, to avoid making a bracha levatala for a shecht, when you shecht, you know that you did not break any one of the five rules, and now you make the bracha. Asks the Gemara, if that's the logic, meyatom, why does Rabbi Yosi ben Horai say Misha Yishchai, implying that right after the shechita, yes, you make the bracha? Why not say further that maybe the bracha should only be allowed to be made Misha Yivdai Kasimanim by an animal? You have to minimally shecht roiv of both the esophagus and the trachea. Roiv shnai. By a bird, you have to minimally shecht roiv echad. So why don't you demand for a bedika to be made? Because if you didn't shecht roiv shnayim, again it's an avela. Answers the Gemara, that just like we find that if we do not have the intestines to look after the shechita, to see whether they are perforated. Similarly, if we don't have the lungs to make a bedika, as we should by the lungs, to see whether they are perforated, because if these inner organ body parts are perforated, they will be one of the treifa categories, whether you want to categorize them in 8 or in 18. And when they are be'en, you have to be boidig them. What happens if you can't find them? As the Gemara gives an example, as we learned in Abraisa, that shchata, if a person shechted an animal, v'notlu haze'evim me'eh, and after the shchita, just as an example, wool swept away the inner organs, whether they are the intestines, whether they are the lungs. In other words, if they would have been here, nowadays we're not boidig the intestines, but we're boidig the lungs. But if there are no lungs, so you would perhaps suggest, well, now you have a suffix, right? Suffix doiraisa, we should be machmir. We don't say that regarding your impossibility of making a badika, right? Why don't we suspect that there is a hole? And if you can't make a badika, why don't we render the animal suffix treifa? And the answer is that Rabbi says b'shem Rabbanan Taman, quoting the Chachamim in Babylonia, that b'nei ma'ayin b'cheskas koishet. When you have a doubt, but you have compounded with it, you have a chazaka, as we say in our case, that since there is a chazaka that they are kosher, so you can rely on that chazaka when you are unable to make a badika. So therefore, coming back to the Gemara's question, you don't have to wait to be boidik, even when the innards are here, for you to make the bracha. You can rely on the chazaka b'negea making a bracha. Masha enkin, when it comes to the 5 halachas of shehiyah and derisa and chalada and agrama and ikur, there's a possibility there is no chazaka. The animal is becheskas ever manachai. An animal that's alive cannot be eaten. You have to prove that you made a shechita prior to you knowing that the shechita was kosher. This is the shita of Rabbi Yosi ben Horai. You can't make a bracha. We don't paskin that way, but that's another exception. Okay, so now we concluded birchas mitzvahs and its exceptions, and the Gemara now was going back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that praying for the past, being tzoyak le'avad is shav, is a tefillah shav. And the Mishnah gave 2 examples. The first one was Keitzad Hoise Ishta Me'oberes, and what we said yesterday when we learned the Mishnah, which was a physical phenomena, which is true that the sperm type itself, there's a male and a female. So what we said yesterday is that don't daven from the beginning. That's what I implied. Really, in the Bavli, the Gemara says don't daven after 40 days, because it takes 40 days for the gender to physically start to become it becomes visible to the eye, to the point that if a woman, God forbid, has a miscarriage after 40 days, it's shaykh already to see the gender. Now, I just want to say that we're going to have a unique Yerushalmi over here. And perhaps this is connected to the fact that the Rebbe advocated making the minimum amount of ultrasounds. The Rebbe was not against ultrasounds for a pregnant woman. The Rebbe, Rabbi Groni used to say, the Rebbe would say in the beginning of the pregnancy, at the end of the pregnancy. In other words, there's an upside to it, right? If the umbilical cord is around the neck of the baby, which is something that happens, and they see it through an ultrasound, right? There's a lot less stress on the baby because they know lachatchila what they need to do. So when there is an upside, but the minhag became that every single time they went to at least when I was in that phase of life, meaning when my wife was in that phase of life, they used to advocate that ultrasound. The Rebbe was against taking these extra ultrasounds, and we're going to see something connected to the Gemara right now. Says the Gemara, what's called the past? The Veis Yanai Oimer. The Chevra, the yeshiva members of the Yanai say that our Mishnah is only b'yoshevas ala mashber he masnisa. This is a huge chiddush, right? Women would give birth on a birthing stool. Even nowadays, when a woman goes to the hospital, so before, when she's still being dilated, she's not yet on the mashber, right? There is, now, 10, now you go give birth. You know, when the Rebbe, also another thing, the Rebbe was very strong that the husband should not be in the room. The husband is not in the room when she's ala mashber, when she's in the birthing room. When she's waiting, the husband should be with her if she wants it. So in other words, that only from when she's on the birthing stool should you not daven. This is huge. Meaning, prior to the woman mamish sitting on the birthing stool, which is really when the baby is beginning to emerge in the world, even though what you think the Gemara knows, that begashmi is, it's either a male or a female. It's not yet. Let me word it these ways. No one knows about it yet. There's a certain bracha that's given in that which is concealed from the eye, that Chazal say clearly, right? So we don't know yet what the gender is. The woman is not on the birthing stool. It's not called davening for the past. Up until when, this is the Yerushalmi, the Bible doesn't say this. Then, Adarabba Yatzle daven. And what will be the tefillah? Well, let me begin with halacha. Halachically, right, we paskin like Beis Hillel, right, that the mitzvah, the obligation is to have a boy and a girl. What happens if a person has a boy? They should daven to have a girl. They should daven, we daven to keep it. The person has a girl, they should daven for a boy. Right, the Chazal say that bas tchila siman yafal laban could be for the first time daven for a girl. However you want to word it, okay? And al shem, and actually when it says in Yirmiyahu, right, we have this beautiful tefillah that we say the night of Yom Kippur. That what that hine kachomer biyad hayoytzer. What are we speaking about? We're speaking about a baby that's already 9 months in the woman's womb. It's still kachomer biyad hayoytzer that the person, which is God Almighty, in the Nimshal, when you have a potter, right, and when the guk of clay, you ever saw those circles, and it's spinning. Even though the guy made lechveis, he made a teapot, as long as it's soft and the thing is still spinning, in 1 second he can make it into a frying pan. This is said up until the point of the mashbeh, that God Almighty, God can do anything. God can change the gender after the baby is born, but that's already a nes. A nes. But until birth, for that you can daven. It's not even called davening for, guys, we don't daven for a nes. It's not even called davening for a nes. And I want to add, that's when no one knows what the gender is, when it's hidden from the eye. Okay. We all do it today. I would say that even if the parents don't know, someone knows, I think that then it's already different. Right. Even though there are cases where the doctors told, this is the, even though, how many cases is there that the doctors knew it this gender and it was the other gender? So the doctors say, oh, we made a mistake. Who said they made a mistake? God changed it. Could be. And where do we find this? Says the Gemara that the Rebbe b'shev the base yanai. That you should know what's the source of that. That ikor ibura shal Dina zachar hayim. When Leah got pregnant with Dina in the beginning was a boy. Elamam ach hashem nispalol Rachel, only after Rachel daven, then nasas nekeva. That fetus was transformed into a female. Now there is a medrash, not Rebbe b'shem the base Rabbi Yanai, that says something else. The medrash says that there was what we call today a surrogate motherhood. The medrash says is that a malach came. Rachel also got pregnant at that time, and Rachel got pregnant with a girl. So a malach put the fetus from one into the womb of the other. And that's the source, halachically today, for the question of a surrogate motherhood. What happens if the egg donor was a non-Jewish woman, but the woman that's carrying it is Jewish, or vice versa? Is that child Jewish or not? The source is from this. Now, in the Gemara, this Gemara is not the Medrash. The Medrash is not saying that there was a switch of fetuses. No, the Gemara is saying is that it changed. No, she was pregnant with a boy, and it became a girl. Why did it have to become a girl? So let me say the Gemara. Let me just say the Gemara by heart. That Rachel was a prophetess, like all the imahs. We say this on the imahs. Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. And therefore, let's go. Rachel knew that Yaakov is destined to have 12 Shvat. At that time, Yaakov had 10 sons. At that time, don't forget that the Shifchos already had 2 each, which means the max Rachel could have had. She didn't know if she's going to have. She's going to have 12. Would be 2 at least, making her equal to the Shifchos. When Dinah got pregnant, so Rachel said, when Leah got pregnant with a boy, so Rachel then knew that if she'll have a boy, she won't even if she'll have 1, the most she can have is 1. So she davened to God that let her be at least equal to the other wives. And that tefillah made Hashem change the child into a female and hadoi. And that's the meaning of what it says in Parshas Vayetze. That by all the other births of the Shvatim, or the births from the 4 wives of Yaakov, it says Vatahar Vatelet. It doesn't say Vatahar Vatelet. It says Va'achar Yolda Bas. What about Vatahar? Because the Vatahar Vatelet was not the same. She got pregnant with a boy. She gave birth to a girl. And that was the Dina. That was the din that Rachel made. So that's not called davening for the past. It's amazing. We don't say, she was a nevuah. She was a neviah. She was a isha tzidkaniyos. How can you compare? The Gemara is not going with that approach. The Gemara is learning from there that all of us, that if no one knows what the gender is, until when a woman is sitting on the birthing stool, it's not called davening for the past. That's how powerful it is having things concealed from the eye. This is gewaldig. The Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi b'shem deveis Rabbi Yanai. Imenu Rachel menvias oreshonis chayis. And therefore Amra, she said, like we spoke of by heart, that oid achari yamimeni. After she gave birth to Yosef, like she knew that there's only 1 son left. And that's why the moment she gave birth to Yosef, what did she say? She called him Yosef. She said, Yosef, Hashem li ben acher. Now let me ask you a question. Why wouldn't she daven, Yosef Hashem li banim acherim? Why wouldn't she say that? That's the raya that she was a nevuah. She was a neviah. I mean, she knew there's only going to be 12. So that's the proof she knew there's only going to be 12. That explains why she davened, because if she would not have known there's only going to be 12, she wouldn't have davened that when Leah got pregnant, it should be a female. She wouldn't have davened for that. Let Leah have 100 sons. She wanted to have sons. But that was the whole point. She knew there's only going to be 12. So this is before Yosef was born. So got pregnant, she davened to Hashem, Hashem, let me not be less than the other wives of Yaakov. Like Leah, I'm not going to be. Let me at least be like Bila and like Zilpah. To have to, and indeed, God listened to her prayers. How beautiful is that? I want to share a story that happened here many, many, many years ago. And the story was that a woman who gave birth had a difficulty by her birth, and she was told by the doctors that she's not allowed to give birth again, and if she'll give birth again, her life will be in danger. And the doctor suggested to tie her tubes. Tying the tubes is something that's also midoraisa, because the Torah says lo yivacha akara, which means both a man who cannot make a vasectomy, if he does so, not only did he violate an isodoraisa, but his wife has to leave him. He has to get divorced, unless he can succeed in reversing it, which is sometimes yes, sometimes not. It's important for people to know that. And that was the suggestion. And okay, I'm not going to repeat that. So now, what happened is that I got involved because we spoke to a big posek in Yerushalmi who did not speak English. I was on the phone with a couple, and he insisted that you're not allowed to do that, even though it's a risk for her life to take other types of halachically acceptable birth controls, even though they're only 96%, 97%, they're not 100%. He says you can't do that. And there was a back and forth, and the woman kept on saying, no, that there's it's a sakonas nefashos. He said, no, you can't do it. And he got noch angry. He told me to tell them, you're speaking to a poisek. You're not speaking to a rabbi. I'm paskening, she's not allowed to do it. So she didn't do it. She gets pregnant. And I called up that poisek, and he gave a bracha. And what was amazing in that pregnancy is that they found on the ultrasound that the child had 6 digits on the hand and on the foot. And 6 digits, it could be a siman of something horrible. Lav dafka. In other words, he had 6 fingers, 6 toes. What happened at the end? The baby was born. Not only did nothing happen to the mother, she lived until 190, the baby had 5 digits. The whole 6 digits, the whole pachad that they went through. And he said, the Poisik says, he took credit. Says, you see, you follow. It wasn't about him. He didn't mean it arrogant. He says, you followed the halacha and God protects you. That's it. That's even with the ultrasound. Okay, let's go back to it. The final example of the Mishnah was if you enter a city and you hear shouting from a home. You don't know whose home it's coming from, but you know that in someone's home there's a calamity. So davening, may this not be in my home. The Gemara says that's a tefillah shop because whatever happened already happened. Now the Gemara is not going to put any qualification. The Gemara is going to say like this: you shouldn't daven. Should you be quiet? No, you shouldn't be quiet. There is something that you should say. Mahu oimer, not to daven. You should articulate b'tachin. Batuach ani she'ein elu b'toich beisi. I am certain that this is not coming from my house. And indeed, Hillel Hazakin oimer regarding a pasuk in Tehillim where we say mishmua ra'a lo yira, that this is the source of that halach. That if a person hears a shmua ra, they don't have clarity. There was some terrible news. I don't know yet from whose family is this terrible news. So bitachon means not to experience fear. Now, there's a gewaldige thing. In other words, don't confuse prayer and bitachon. Even when there's no prayer, you can have bitachon. Now, if I might suggest, what I might suggest is that the Gemara is really saying that if you have bitachon, then a miracle will happen to you. That's the way I think the Gemara is saying. That means even if the calamity wasn't the person's home, the fact that they have bitachon is not they're naive. It's not naive, it's relying on God. The relying on God in itself is even more powerful than a prayer. We find this by Chizkiyahu HaMelech, that he had bitachon, that he went to sleep with Sanchedev, and the biggest miracle happened. Okay, let's go back. Says the next one, Halacha Daf. Now, in Bavli, we have Tfilas HaDerech, right, as a tefillah made by Eliyahu Navi Mendel. I think so, right? Eliyahu Navi made Tfilas HaDerech, I think. Here we have a whole Mishnah and an elaboration, and you'll see the birth of Tfilas HaDerech. Hanichnas lekrach, if you enter a city, now there are a couple of caveats. First of all, we're speaking about a large city, makes a big difference halachically versus a small city. And we're speaking about a city in which you do not live. In every city, you have to have a government. There's no Bereda. It's an evil, but it's a necessary evil. You have to have a police, you have to have roads, you have to have, so people give up their freedom. So we do it, we try to do it as minimal as possible. And the downside of a government is that where there's a government, there's corruption. And part of the corruption, a lot of the corruption had to do with travel. When you travel, people are very vulnerable. Until today, people try to save money when they could before they go on a trip. But when they're on the trip, the hostage can Bereda. You have to pay an extra fee for your luggage. You have to pay for the airline. You have to pay for a hotel. You don't have an option. You're traveling. One of the oldest ways of gambling from people that they're yoitze in New York, amazing. I don't know why they don't do it yet in California. Here they steal many other ways. Is tolls. You have no Bereda. Tolls is a baby. Who are the parents of the tolls? The bandits, the robbers that would stand on the roads. That's what they used to do. And people that went by, they would bagam for you as much as they want. That's mamish. That b'diyuk. It's that. It's just Sodom. We became we accepted ganovim. So entering the city is a moment of danger because the city officers and there's real corruption. Ad hayoim hazeh. So if they're not going to take from Chaim because they like Chaim, they're going to take double from Yankel. So you have to make a davening. So you daven twice, and the Gemara will elaborate. One when you enter, one when you leave. Benazi says daven 4 times. I think he traveled once. Oh, did they get him? He says arba. Again, the Gemara is going to give the tefillah. But both, this is both on the Tanakama and Ben Azai, as we'll see in a moment. It's really not four prayers as in God, please help me. One of them is a prayer of God, please help me, and one of them is gratitude for the fact that you were already helped. Okay, the noisin, the way it works is based on what we learned in the previous mission that you don't daven for the past. If Shabach, you give for the past. The noisin hoidal avad, you give thanks for that which you were already protected from. And vitzoyek la'asad, and you cry out to God that He should protect you from the dangers of the government, of those bandits. Says the Gemara, let's go into the details. This is really a braisa that nichnas lekrach b'spalol shtayim. And that is, like we said in the Mishnah, the Tanakama, achnas bichnisase ve'achas biyitziyase. So bichnisase mahu oimer, yihiratzim ufanecha Hashem alekai ve'alekei avisai, shetachnisein lekrach zel lisholim. Simple. Ubitziyase oimer. So the Braisa is clarifying that even the Tanakama that has two, not four, there's also a prayer and a thanksgiving. A thanksgiving is when you leave the city. That when you leave the city, you say, Moide ani lefanecha Hashem alekai, that what? That you brought me out, lisholim, a short prayer. So you ask before you enter, and you're only safe after you leave the city. How ironic. People have this delusion. When they leave the city and there's no one there, they get scared. Be afraid of the city. No, this is going back, this is an elaboration on the Mishnah in the Braisa. And what is that? So Ben Azai, like the Tanakama, has the exact same tefillah. However, what he adds is that there are bandits, the government, when you enter, when you exit. They tax you twice. They put when you enter. So when you enter, the fact that you got through you're already in the city, right away, nichnas, you have to give a thank you. That I entered in peace. And then another big klal, when you thank God, add a prayer. Whenever you thank someone, right away ask for something else. So chaparain, and now I already asked you, that when I leave, but that's all the one. Now, when you leave, when you're about to leave, I know people now, my father's generation, whenever they came to a passport control, they got nervous. That's a generational trauma because by the Holocaust, in other words, when you go through borders for today's peoples, it's nothing. No. For people of the older generation, you sit it. But now again, they thank, and that's the ikad. Now, once you thank God when you left, now you have to go on the derech. So now we're beginning, and this is the birth of Tfilas HaDerech. So now Ben Azai says, you already asked, make an ask. Cain. That what? That I should get home to my house. And then you give details. And that's really the beginning of Tfilas HaDerech. Now, in what type of city do you have to worry so much about entering and exiting? The Gemara is going to clarify. Now, the Gemara was written in Eretz Yisrael. So you have to know, in Eretz Yisrael, cities that were run by Jews did not have this type of corruption. Then, mamish. So there wasn't danger. So the Gemara says, Hadada Amar, this whole Mishnah is b'medoides goyim. Is where you're living, where goyim live. Aval b'Yisrael, ein sarech levarech. Look inside the Pnei Moshe, second to last line in the Amid. It's dangerous. Aval b'makom Yisrael, ein sarech levarech. A big rule. However, even where Yidden are governing the city, continues the Gemara, if it's a place, Shahargan Sham doesn't mean like Sao Paulo, where people get murdered on the street. No, it means it's a city for which, for certain violations, legally there is capital punishment. And there's always a fear, a legitimate fear, that a person will be accused of a crime that they never committed. So if the worst punishment in this locality is not death, the worst case scenario, this led. But if a person goes into, even the Mendoris Yisrael, look inside the lab before we turn, the last Pnei Moshe, before we turn the Amid. The Makam Shahardgan Sham, he says, no, should done and did in a not a city where there's violence. He's not talking about that. Then for sure you make brachas. then afilu bekrach shedarin Yisrael tzarich levarich. Why? Because a person might be accused of a crime that did not commit, and the Shem lo yimsa misha yilmud alav schos. You won't have money for a lawyer. I mean, those words are not written in the Pnei Moshe. It just means there won't be someone who's going to protect. No, you're trapped. No one knows you. When people know you, and until today, one of the things they do in a court is that people testify to the good character of that individual. It doesn't prove they didn't do the crime, but if it's a capital case, in many cases, even today, the person won't get killed. No, it's for that danger, turning to Daf Tzadik Beis Amud Beis, Avol b'medoides Yisrael, even afilu, I'm sorry, Israel, then tzarich levarei. Now that we spoke about entering a city, we're going to speak about entering a bathhouse, and we have something similar in the Bavli. Let me just give a quick introduction. The latrine and the bathhouse. So when a person walks, let's go with one approach, that if you are worthy, you're going to have two malachim accompanying you. Another way of wording it is that every person has malachim accompanying them. Ki malacha v'tzavaloch l'shmarcha b'chol derechecha, elav b'minecha u'revava. Right, we have in the right, we have 10,000, we have 1,000 on the left. People have malachim. If you are worthy, you're more connected to them. You're loftier, you're closer to them. And when a person comes to a Beis HaKisei, there's really, again, these things are nuances. Either they even go into the latrine with you, but it's nebach the malachim. It's not pleasant for them. Or, no, they remain outside. And whichever way you learn pshat, there was a certain bracha that used to be said regarding the malachim. The only thing we have, again, a baby from this whole thing is Friday night, the Shalom Aleichem, where we say Shalom Aleichem and we say Tzeischem L'Shalom. But here we have the following bracha. It says, this is all a braisa, that Nichnas LaBeis HaKisei, whenever a person enters a latrine, we're speaking about Gedolim, right, not urinating, the Mevarach Shtayim. Achnas B'chnisasi v'achas b'tziyasi. And B'chnisasi mahu oimer. And again, he's speaking to the malachim. He's saying, Kavod lochem, kavod to you, who? Hamichubadim, you honored ones, which are Mesharsei Kodesh. These are the malachim. All right, look inside the top Maharafulda. Al hamalachim hamalavim loy omar kei. Where do we bechlal know that there are malachim? So he brings the Tehillim Tzadik Aleph, ki malachi v'tzavalach v'goymer. And then we tell the malachim, that what am I doing? Let's go with the pshat that they can't enter with you, so they're forced to stop. So you're telling them that like, this is the way God made me. This is the way of the land. You guys don't have bodies. We have physical bodies, and therefore panu derech, clear a path. And then we say Baruch Hakel Hakoved. The God of glory is the God of the Malach. Hakel of the Mechubad. In other words, we acknowledge that they're with us, and it's almost like, please excuse me for a moment. That's when people are having, I have to tend to my needs. So we speak that to the malachim. Brings it down and brings down the whole Nusach HaBrach. The Yerushalmis knew it so well they didn't have to say it. So, and that the Asher Yatzah is something that we say now. Now, let me go into a bathhouse. The bathhouses, most of them had the waters heated in the bathhouse. We already learned a lot of the bathhouse in Brachas Yerushalmi, so there were 3 chambers. But in the innermost chamber, not only were there the actual baths, that was also, it served not only for people to bathe in, but it made a lot of vapor. It was a schwitz. It was the best they can get to a schwitz. But the way it worked was that you walked on boards. Under the boards were large pits. You can go today to excavations. You'll see them in Eretz Yisrael. And in there, they would put coal, coconut coal, guys. I think I'm still the biggest client. Maybe not. I hope not. And they would warm the water under your feet. So when you walked in there, you can get burnt with fire, you can get scalded by water, and the boards can break and you can fall into a pit. There's a lot of dangers. And the type of safeties that they had nowadays, B'chlal did not exist. There was no seat belts, you understand? So there was actually a certain amount of sakana. We learned, I forgot on what daf nun, I forgot that when we learned the sugi of making a tzavah, I think Rabbi Mana, before he went into a bathhouse, would make a tzavah. Today you would say buy with Fishman, buy life insurance before you go to the Schwitz over here in Pico. Nichnas lamerchatz mispalel shtayim. That's it. We substituted davening for insurance. Insurance is for people not to need to daven. We don't need God. We're insured. God forbid. Achas b'chnisase v'achas b'tziyase. B'chnisase yoymin esomach Hashem Elokai. And you have to daven for all three. Save me from not getting burned. And from not being scalded with hot water. And these were the three things I might fall into the pit. And then you would add va'al yera dova benafshi. Maybe I shouldn't get molested. I don't know what the dova benafshi means. V'im yera. And if something happens, so then anu tefillah. Hey, misasi kapara kol v'noisi. Let at least my death be a kapara. At least let me. It's so good. Oh, and then he says, at least in the next round, it shouldn't happen again. Let me just get over with it. That is before. So before you make a davening, when you exit, the same rhyme and reason. You think, like Asher Yotze, you're thinking. And then you say says the Gemara, hold on. What about in the back? He had water imported. All of the above, with all the three details, is only b'merchat shehin is soikes. Soikes means that in it the water is heated. Aval b'merchat she'ein in the soikes, which was probably the bathhouse in Rabbi Bo's village, it wasn't so good. Not so dangerous doesn't mean you shouldn't daven. Daven for whatever you have to daven for. There, you can still get burnt with water. That stuff is meant to happen. Some people see dangers everywhere. Oh, says the Gemara that Rabbi Chil, they have another nuance when it comes to tefillah of the merchatz. Tefillah hamerchatz eino tu'una amida. Now, there's so many ways of wording. You don't have to stand. What is he talking about? So there's a whole different argument in what he means. The Mara Fulda says that normally when you make a bracha, stand. Don't walk. But when you're going into the bathhouse, when you're getting close to the bathhouse is where you make the bracha. You don't have to stop. That's the pshat. That eino tu'una, you don't have to stop. You can make this bracha even when you're walking, which is, by the way, lohoir, which means other brachas. Let's say a person ate something. So we already learned in brachas before, right? When it comes to we learned the Mishnah. When it comes to alamichya, when it comes certainly to benching, you have to go back. When it comes to b'rin nefashis, you don't have to go back. But it doesn't mean you should say it when you're walking. Stop and make the b'rin nefashis. Now there's another whole different approach that if a person is, like we said, there's the middle chambers where people start getting undressed. And when people get undressed, they would already be sitting. And if they would stand up, there's a possibility that the garments that are half removed can completely get removed. So don't stand up when you make the bracha, bleib sitzen, in order for you properly to be covered, for there not to be the issue of when you're making a bracha. These are the two approaches in the final statement, and let's begin with halacha. Now this is huge. Okay, this is a good chazara, right, for people who learn Bavli. So the Mishnah begins like this: that chayiv levarech al rak shem shemuvarech halotay. We already had that ra dayin ha'emes. What we perceive to be ra dayin ha'emes. For toiva, we make either shechiyanu or a toiva amet. The way we will learn pshat, as the charedim, the top charedim brings from the Rav Bar Tanura, that the Mishnah is not contradicting what we learned before. That you have to make the same bracha al rak shem shal toiva. Which, by the way, in the Babli, if I'm not mistaken, the Gemara says that when Mashiach will come at some time in the future, we'll always make a shechiyanu. We're never going to make a dayin ha'emes because we're going to perceive everything to being good. That's not what the Mishnah is saying. For ra, you make a dayin ha'emes. For toiva, you make a shechiyanu or toiva meit. But with what type of enthusiasm do you make the bracha? That's what the Mishnah is saying. That the same joy that a person feels when they make the bracha of shechiyanu, this is a high demand. They should have that same enthusiasm when they make a dayin ha'emes. If
not realistic.
You don't like them, I get that. If it's a personal, you gotta. So this is a high. Look. Let's read inside the top chareid. That not the same bracha, different bracha. That keshemevarech dayin ha'emes al hara chayiv levarech besimcha beleif toiv kishem shemevarech ha'toiv amet. That's the meaning of the Mishnah. And where do we get that from? Shenemar, right? We have in Parshas Voschanan, the first portion of the Shema, v'yahavta eis Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'oidecha, as we will see to the proof for our case from the words of b'chol me'oidecha teaches the Mishnah all of the three statements. So statement number one, loving God with all of your hearts. B'chol levavecha, not b'chol libcha, implies two hearts. What are the two hearts? B'shtei yitzarech, v'yetzer tova, v'yetzer hara. And with, as Chassidus elaborates, this goes not goes to a skaf. That's also loving. Loving by allowing the godly to express, loving by suppressing the negative. And avade, if you are mahapech, hisapcha, so you're using both hearts, la'avodas Hashem. That's the b'chol levavcha lashon haba. B'chol nafshecha, right? So Chazal teach us afilu noitelas nafshecha, right? Rabbi Akiva, mesiras nefesh b'poyel mamash. That even now, are we always obligated to give up our lives? No, but whenever we are, for the three big Avedas, or for a religious edict against the Jewish people, or edict, or like the Goyim, sometimes just kill us because we're Jews, or the soldiers right now that are Mechemes Mitzvah. So that's the pshat. Literally, afilu neitelas nafshecha. Now, b'chol ma'odecha doesn't mean like we have in the Va'ata Tetzavah, that the Mesiras Nefesh of America is a bigger Mesiras Nefesh. Giving up your life one time is nothing greater than that. But from one angle, living a life of Mesiras Nefesh, day in and day out, that's the highest level. And that's included the B'chol Ma'odecha. Now we have a few pshatim. Either Ma'odecha means you're very much. What's the person's very much? Money. So one pshat is B'chol Ma'odecha, B'chol Ma'odecha. And the Jewish vendors make sure that we fulfill this mitzvah every day. They charge a lot of money for keeping Yiddishkeit. So yeah, you're yotzes. They're helping us. They're doing us a favor. Davar acher b'chol moedecha. B'chol moedecha. This is something Chassidus brings. B'chol mida umida shuhu moedid lach. Moed means mida. God relates to us in different midos. Midos means to us it appears this was kind and that was judgmental. Even the Mishnah uses the word zarah. No matter how God is interacting with us, bakoil, in all cases, have a moed like moed. So mida it's a and mida, guys, means being moida. That you should be moida to the Eibishter with the same enthusiasm. That's the Rabbi Tanura. Chayv levarich besimcha ubetuv leiv. Yeshem Shemar, and the Rebbe was so strong in always repeating these words. In other words, we have to not only accept our lot, but do the avodah besimcha. And now we're going from Chayv levarich halarach to Teva. The next law in the Mishnah is regarding specific behaviors through which we express reverence to God Almighty, the Makom HaMikdash. And let's begin. So Shara Mizrach is when you're standing today, right on the east, what they call the East Yerushalmi, and you should know. Let me just speak out something important. That Bizman Bayis Rishon, the way the Sha'arim worked is that even though Harabais is on a mountain, so you walk straight and then you walked up steps, but the gate, the Mizrach gate, from which most people would enter, the whole complex of the Beis HaMikdash, was mechuven keneged, not only the opening of the Ulam and the opening of the Heichal, but there used to be in Bayis Rishon what Chazal called the Amma Traxin, which means that there was a wall that was 1 amma wide that separated the Kodesh from the Kachi Kachin. In middle of that wall, there was an opening for the Kohen Gadol to enter on Yom Kippur, but in order for it not to be exposed to your eye, there was a curtain that covered it. But whenever he entered on Yom Kippur, he would enter through the middle of the wall of the Amma Traxin, which means that when you're standing outside the Beis HaMikdash complex, but you're Keneged Shara Mizrach, you can say that you're Mechuven Keneged Beis Kodesh Kachin. I'm saying this in contrast to Bayis Sheni. In Bayis Sheni, as we learned together, right, in Yuma, and in many other places, that there wasn't anymore an Amma Traxin. They didn't know where to place it. They had the double curtain. But what they did with the double curtain was that there was a machlokes the outer curtain was open to Tzaf and Darim. There was a whole machlekes in the Mishnah how he would walk the Kohen Gadol in Yuma. Doesn't matter. But whichever side was open, there was never an entrance in the center. So either if the outer curtain was opened in the north, so it was opened in the north, like it was flapped over, and then the Kohen Gadol would walk in between the curtains, and he would walk to the south, and then the curtain to the south was bent over, but not the center. So just to make it clear, that when we say lo yakel adam es roishe keneged shara mizrach, that even though you're outside, but the moment you are keneged shara mizrach, all right, that doesn't go to Yemin Moshe. You're not keneged shara mizrach, so you're good. It's easier to live. We're speaking about when, God willing, when we're going to buy a property in the East Yerushalmi. Over there, when you go to Harabayis, when I drive to Harabayis, you go in between very safe neighborhoods over there, between the goyim. So at some places, you're keneged shara mizrach. Now, what does it mean, lo yokel adam es roshi? Technically, halachically, you have so many different opinions. It means not to chit-chat. It means not to stand naked. It means not to cut your hair. It means if people who cut the beard, not to cut the beard. It means not to urinate. I want you to know that in halacha, there are many, what does it mean, lo yokel? Whatever it means, you're not allowed to do that, even though you are outside of harabayis, but you're keneged shara mizrach. This doesn't apply to the koisen. There's bathrooms over there because you're not. In other words, we're speaking about if you are in a place where you are keneged shara mizrach and only bisman bayis rishon. Another detail. Shehu mechuven keneged beis kodesh kachim. And okay, and I just the words that I'm saying is in the Charedim. The Charedim says, "Beis kachar kachim be made bayis rishon." He doesn't explain why, but we explain right now why. That's in the Charedim around 50 lines from the top row. Now another din. All about how we express our reverence to God by being machabed the Makom HaMikdash. And even though that there is the temple complex, but in extension there is the unique kedusha of Harabayis. Actually, Harabayis is called Machne Leviyah. So Yerushalmi is kodesh, but there are 10 levels of kedusha. Harabayis is already considered the domain of the temple, and therefore v'lo yikanes laHarabayis b'makloi. Don't enter Harabayis with your walking staff. That was a normal thing then. Right, and people, you go to Europe, people are walking with walking staffs. Don't go there with your walking staff. It's ubim and oli or with your shoe, because in the bottom of your shoe, I want you to know many people they have a minute. You walk into their homes, you take off your shoes. The bottom of your shoes are dirty, like people cannot imagine. So you cannot enter the whole harabayis with your shoes. Upa apundase, here we have a big machlekes. What upa apundase is, the Charedim brings both opinions. Either it means your money belt, right, or it means your with your undergarments. You can have undergarments on you, but on top of your undergarments, you put outer garments. People wear undergarments, pashat, not too dirty. They wear a jalaba. That's the same reason today, but there's a certain amount of perspiration and other things that that come out of the body, and you don't want it to go on your outer garment. So walking around basically is not respectful. You can't enter the harabayis uba apundasei, nor uba avak she'al raglov. So in other words, you take off your shoes. Take off your shoes right before you enter the harabayis, because what did you by taking off your shoes 10 blocks away? So it's just as disrespectful because you have dust under your feet. Another din, v'lo yasenu kapandario. Kapandaria means don't use the harabayis nor any place in the Beis HaMikdash as a shortcut. As a shortcut. This halacha even applies nowadays to a Beis HaKnesses, Beis HaMedrash, not to make it into a kapandaria. What's the word kapandaria? Here also there's a machlekes. Some people say it's Lashon Yevani, but the Charedim over here brings that kapandaria is a composite of the following statement in Aramaic. And by the way, the Aramaic in the Yerushalmi we already mentioned is Aramish and Greek. So the words in the Charedim is Adem me kifna darei. A person says to themselves, instead of me needing to go around making a hekef on darei, on the row, why should I go around the row? I'll go through the houses. I'll go through someone's property. A shortcut. You got it? So kapandari, you see the kufpei is to make bimakif. The dalid reish yud is darei, rose. And the aleph is eil baha. So back over here. And now, says the Mishnah, urikika, spitting on the harabayis is prohibited bikal v'chomer, says the Charedim. That madach minol, wearing shoes is not derech bizoyin. No, nervous then. It's dirty. So you're not going to bring the dirt into harabayis. So kal v'chomer, that the act of spitting itself, which is derech bizoyin, loy kolchen. Okay, we'll stop over here, almost at the bottom of the Amid, and we're middle of the Mishnah, and God willing, tomorrow to be continued. Mayaleno, they spit. I should have said this. Of course, because that's derech kavod to God. That's a spitting that's giving honor to God. The opposite. No, I know. Even though
question, Rabbi, you have a second.
away from the Aron Kodesh.